You simply cannot come inside looking like that, Arthur. You're ruining the entire aesthetic. Monica stood in the doorway of the sprawling Queen Anne estate I had designed and paid for, blocking my path with a manicured hand as if I were a solicitor rather than the owner of the property. I stood there on the porch, water dripping from the brim of my waxed canvas hat, clutching a bag of hand-carved wooden toys for the grandchildren she promised were coming but never arrived, while she looked at my worn flannel shirt with undisguised disgust. Behind her, the warmth of the gas fireplace I paid to install flickered against the marble floors I paid to polish, and I saw my son, Julian. He was holding a glass of vintage Cabernet, standing by the mantel, and when our eyes met, he didn't step forward to defend his father. He looked down at his Italian loafers and took a sip of wine. That was the moment the foundation finally cracked. I didn't yell, I didn't demand respect, and I certainly didn't tell her that the envelope in my pocket contained a check for their kitchen renovation. I simply smiled, the cold, hard smile of a contractor realizing a building is condemned, and said, "Understood, Monica. Enjoy the party." I walked to my truck, strictly refusing to look back. Most men would have been crying. Most fathers would be heartbroken that their son chose a glass of wine over his own dad. But as I started the engine of my Ford F-150 and looked at the rearview mirror, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt something else entirely. Clarity. For 4 years, I told myself I was supporting my family. But as I drove away, the math finally started to make sense. The house they were standing in. Legally mine. Title held under the Vance family trust. The mortgage payment. $8,400 a month, auto-drafted from my retirement savings. The landscaping, the high-speed fiber internet for her streaming career, the Tesla Model X in the driveway. All leased in my name. Even the credit card she was probably using right now to order more champagne. Authorized by me for emergencies only. I had justified it all as the cost of keeping my son in my life. But tonight, that cost became too high. I touched the envelope in my breast pocket containing a $50,000 check for their kitchen renovation. I let out a dry laugh. That money wasn't going into a quartz countertop. It was staying right where it belonged. By the time I reached the ferry, the grief was gone. Whatever bond one had with them didn't break, it was simply voided. I wasn't their father anymore. I was their bank. And the bank was officially closed. The silence of my cabin on Bainbridge Island was a stark, heavy contrast to the artificial noise I had left behind in Seattle, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel lonely. It felt like a clean slate waiting for a new design. I sat at my desk, the heavy slab of reclaimed fur cool under my hands, and opened the leather-bound ledger that contained the anatomy of my son's life. For 4 years, I had treated this book like a holy text, meticulously balancing their deficits with my surplus, ensuring that Julian and Monica never felt the cold draft of reality. I had categorized every bailout as an investment in family, telling myself that a father's job is to build a shelter so strong that his children never have to know the storm. But as I ran my finger down the column of expenses, the mortgage payments on the house in Queen Anne, the lease on the Tesla Model X, the consulting fees for Monica's non-existent interior design business, I realized I hadn't built a shelter. I had built a prison of entitlement, and I was the warden who kept the gates locked from the inside. I opened my laptop, the blue light illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air of the study, and logged into the master administrative account for the Vance Family Trust. The screen populated with a web of automatic transfers and standing orders, a digital circulatory system that pumped my life's savings into veins that were already rotting from the inside out. I looked at the mortgage first, $8,400 a month for a property that sat on land I had purchased in the 80s, a house I had designed to capture the morning light over the Cascades. They treated it like a hotel, a backdrop for social media posts where they complained about the stress of hosting, yet they had never paid a dime of property tax, never fixed a leaking faucet, never even mowed the lawn. My finger hovered over the "Cancel Autopay" button, a simple command that would initiate a cascade of automated letters and legal notices. I didn't hesitate. I clicked, and a small dialog box asked if I was sure. I was more sure of this than I had been of anything since my wife passed away. Next came the utilities and the services, the invisible infrastructure of their comfort that they assumed was as natural and endless as the air they breathed. The high-speed fiber internet essential for Monica's streaming, the radiant floor heating that kept her feet warm while she criticized my footwear, the premium security system they used to keep out the riff-raff, which apparently now included me. I moved through the list with the dispassionate efficiency of a demolition expert identifying load-bearing walls. Click. Cancel. Confirm. The heat would stay on for a billing cycle, but the internet provider was less forgiving with non-payment, and the security monitoring would cease within 24 hours. I was systematically stripping away the insulation I had wrapped around them, exposing them to the raw, unbuffered temperature of the real world. It wasn't cruelty, it was physics. If you remove the supports from a structure that cannot stand on its own, it must fall. The final step was the most personal, and arguably the most dangerous, the American Express Platinum card held in my name, with Monica listed as an authorized user for household emergencies. I pulled up the transaction history and felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the ferry ride. There were no emergencies here, unless one counted a $600 dinner at Canlis or a $2,000 weekend retreat at a spa in the San Juan Islands as a crisis. She used this card to curate the image of a wealthy, successful influencer, a life financed entirely by the old fool in the flannel shirt. I watched the pending transaction from tonight, a catering charge for the party I had just been ejected from, hovering at the top of the list. I clicked Remove Authorized User, and then, for good measure, I marked the card as lost or stolen to trigger an immediate freeze. The connection was severed instantly. The plastic rectangle in her purse was now just a piece of scrap material, as worthless as her gratitude. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, cheap stuff that burned on the way down, and sat back in my chair to watch the digital fallout. It didn't take long. My phone, which I had placed face down on the desk, buzzed with a notification from the bank app. Transaction declined. Uber Eats, $145.50. 10 minutes later, another buzz. Transaction declined. Uber Eats, $145.50. She was trying to order late-night food for her lingering guests, probably laughing about the help while she tapped her manicured nails on the screen. I imagined the confusion on her face, the furrow of her brow as she tried a second card, the one linked to Julian's account, which I knew was overdrawn because I had stopped the transfer that covered his overdrafts. The humiliation would be small at first, a glitch she could explain away, but it was the first crack in the dam. I didn't wait for the phone to ring. I knew they wouldn't call tonight. They would assume it was a banking error, a system outage, anything but the deliberate action of a man they considered powerless. I powered down the laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the dark silhouette of the fir trees against the night sky. For 4 years, I had laid awake at night worrying about their future, worrying about whether I was doing enough, giving enough. Tonight, as the wind howled around the eaves of my cabin, I felt a profound, heavy peace settle over me. I had finally stopped trying to hold up the sky for people who wouldn't even look up to see the effort. I went to bed and slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a man who has finished a hard day's work. Christmas morning broke over Bainbridge Island with a steel-gray sky and a biting frost that turned the fir trees into jagged sculptures of ice, a stark beauty that felt entirely appropriate for the day's agenda. Inside my cabin, the wood stove hummed with a steady, dry heat, the kind that seeps into your bones and stays there, while I made my coffee slowly, grinding the beans by hand and listening to the silence I had gifted myself. There were no frantic texts from Julian asking when I would arrive to fix a crisis with the oven, no demands from Monica to stay out of the frame while she live-streamed her morning routine, just the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock and the wind rattling the sash windows. I sat by the window, watching the steam rise from my mud, knowing that 15 miles away across the water, the scene was very different because I knew exactly how the house in Queen Anne was programmed. I had designed that a smart home system myself, integrating the heating, the lighting, and a security into a single hub controlled by an account I paid for, and when I canceled the internet service and revoked the administrative credentials the night before, the house would have defaulted to its factory settings, security shutters down, thermostat set to a chilly 55 degrees, and the high-speed connection severed. They were waking up in a cold, dark, offline tomb of their own making. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout to arrive on my doorstep. For around 10 o'clock, just as the sun was trying to push through the heavy cloud layer, a familiar silver Tesla Model X tore up my gravel driveway, skidding slightly on the ice. It was a vehicle designed for pavement and valet stands, not the rugged terrain of the island, and the sight of it sliding sideways gave me a grim sense of satisfaction as Monica stormed out of the driver's side before the car had even come to a full stop. She wasn't wearing the pristine, color-coordinated lounge set she usually debuted on Christmas morning. Instead, she was wrapped in a heavy parka that looked like it had been pulled from the back of a closet, her hair messy, her face devoid of the makeup she used as armor. She didn't knock. She pounded on the solid oak door with a fist that had never done a day's hard labor in its life, screaming my name with a desperation that shattered the morning peace. I opened the door, mug in hand, and watched her chest heave with exertion and rage as the cold wind rushed past her into the warmth of the room. "You turned it off," she screamed, her voice cracking in the cold air, her eyes wild with panic. "You turned everything off. The heat, the internet, the security system were locked out of the main interface. Do you have any idea what you've done? It's Christmas. We're freezing, and I can't even get online to complain about it." She pushed past me into the warmth of the cabin, shivering violently, her eyes darting around the rustic interior with that familiar look of disdain, expecting me to apologize, to rush to my laptop and fix the glitch, to grovel for forgiveness because I had inconvenienced her. She stood by the wood stove, rubbing her hands together, waiting for me to play my role, but I simply closed the door slowly to keep the heat in and walked to the kitchen counter where a single manila envelope sat waiting. "I didn't turn it off, Monica," I said, my voice calm, leveled, matching the stillness of the room as I picked up the envelope. "I canceled it, and there is a significant difference because turning it off implies it can be turned back on, while canceling means the contract is void." She spun around, her mouth open in disbelief, the entitlement radiating off her like heat from a furnace. You canceled the utilities? On Christmas? Are you insane? Julian is in a car trying to get a signal to call the power company, but they're closed. You have to fix this, Walter. Right now. My parents are coming over at 2, and the house is 50 degrees. The sheer audacity was breathtaking, a physical force that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room, for she wasn't worried about me, or even really about the cold. She was worried about the embarrassment of hosting a party in a cold house without the digital connectivity required to broadcast her success. "Your parents can host," I said, holding the envelope out to her. "Or you can take them to a hotel, but you won't be doing it on my dime anymore." She stared at the packet as if it were a bomb, her anger momentarily replaced by a flicker of genuine fear, the kind that people like Monica feel when they sense the floor dropping out beneath them. "What is this?" she whispered, snatching it from my hand and ripping it open, her eyes scanning the legal document inside. A notice to quit. She read the title aloud, her voice trembling. Termination of tenancy. You're evicting us. She looked up at me, her face pale. You can't do this. We have rights. We've lived there for 4 years. That's our home. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the bitterness, and shook my head slowly. It's my house, Monica. It's in my name. The deed is in my safe, and you never signed a lease because I thought family didn't need contracts. I was wrong. In the eyes of the law, you are guests who have overstayed your welcome, creating a month-to-month tenancy which I am now terminating. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. But where will we go? The scream was gone now, replaced by a whining desperation that was almost harder to listen to. Julian doesn't have the credit for a place like that. We can't move. My studio is there. My aesthetic is there. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw nothing but a vacuum where a soul should be. You called me the help last night, I reminded her quietly. You told your friends my shirt ruined your vibe. Well, Monica, consider this a renovation. I'm getting the rot from my life. I walked to the door and held it open, letting the cold wind swirl the snow around her boots. Go home and pack. You have 30 days. And Monica, don't try to use the Tesla charger. I canceled that account too. She stared at me for a long moment, her face twisting through shock, then bargaining, and finally settling on pure, unadulterated hatred before she marched out the door, the envelope crunched in her fist, climbing back into the silver SUV without a word to the husband waiting in the passenger seat. The drive into Winslow the next morning was quieter than usual, the island still shaking off the heavy, wet blanket of the Christmas storm, but the moment I stepped into Bainbridge Hardware, I knew the atmosphere had shifted in a way that had nothing to do with the barometric pressure. Usually, a trip to the hardware store was a 40-minute affair, punctuated by conversations with Ed behind the counter regarding lumber prices or catching up with the local contractors who were always hovering near the coffee pot, but today, the conversation died the second the door chime announced my arrival. Heads turned, then quickly averted, eyes looked down at muddy boots or up at the ceiling fans, and a heavy, awkward silence filled the aisles that usually smelled of sawdust and camaraderie, a silence that felt thick with judgment. I didn't stop to ask why, instead walking to the fasteners aisle to find the galvanized lag bolts I needed for the dock repair, bringing my items to the register where Ed, a man I'd known for 30 years and whose roof I had helped frame after the storm of '98, rang me up without looking me in the eye. His hands were shaking slightly as he counted back my change, and finally, he leaned in, his voice low and rough like he was speaking through gravel, to say, "Arthur, you might want to check your phone, or maybe just stay off the internet for a while because it's getting ugly out there." I didn't check my phone in the truck, preferring to wait until I was back in the sanctuary of my cabin with a fresh cup of coffee and the wood stove popping in the corner, where I could analyze the situation with the detachment of a man reviewing a flawed blueprint. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and didn't have to search hard to find what Ed was talking about because it was trending on local Twitter, reposted on the Bainbridge community Facebook page, and originating, of course, from TikTok. The thumbnail showed Monica, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy, huddled under a hotel duvet looking small and fragile, a stark contrast to the woman who had screamed demands at me on my porch 24 hours earlier. The caption read, "My billionaire father-in-law evicted us on Christmas because he forgot who we were. Hashtag elder abuse, hashtag toxic family, hashtag homeless at Christmas," and as I clicked play, the room filled with her whispery, terrified voice backed by a somber piano track she had undoubtedly added in post-production to maximize the emotional manipulation. "I don't even know where to start," she said, wiping away a tear that looked suspiciously like a glycerin drop placed for maximum effect, her voice trembling with a rehearsed vulnerability. "We went to see him for Christmas, just to bring him gifts, and he didn't recognize us. He started screaming that we were trespassers, throwing us out in the snow, and then he cut the power to our house because he has the controls and left his own granddaughter freezing." I paused the video, staring at the screen, noting that we didn't have a granddaughter, only her French bulldog, Chanel, yet she was deliberately using ambiguous language to incite the mob. In the background of the shot, out of focus but clearly visible, sat Julian, staring at the floor with his head in his hands, looking utterly defeated while Monica gestured to him as if he were a prop in her tragedy. "Look at my husband," she continued, panning the camera slightly. "He's broken. He spent the last 4 years caring for his father, managing the estate because Arthur can't do it anymore, and this is the thanks we get. He's suffering from rapid onset dementia, and instead of getting help, he's hoarding his wealth and hurting the only people who care about him." I watched the video 3 times, dissecting it with the same clinical detachment I used to analyze structural stress tests, realizing that it was a lie, but a brilliantly constructed one. She had taken the indisputable facts, that I had evicted them and cut the utilities, and wrapped them in a narrative that made me the villain and her the victim of a senile, abusive tyrant. By claiming I had dementia, she wasn't just looking for sympathy, she was laying the groundwork for a legal maneuver, trying to paint me as incompetent, a danger to myself and others. The comments were a river of vitriol, thousands of strangers projecting their own traumas onto a situation they knew nothing about, screaming for adult protective services, demanding someone find this old man and teach him a lesson, and claiming that the rich should be eaten. She had weaponized the internet's reflexive hatred of authority and wealth against me, painting a target on my back with a ring light and a filter. The phone call started an hour later, initially just a few neighbors leaving hesitant messages asking if I was feeling okay or if I needed assistance, but soon escalating to unknown numbers, heavy breathing, and voices screaming obscenities before hanging up. Monica had been careful not to dox my address directly, but Bainbridge is a small island, and the internet is a hive mind. It didn't take a detective to connect Arthur Vance to the log cabin on the north end. I sat there, listening to a stranger tell me I should rot in hell, and realized that Monica had made a tactical error because she thought this public shaming would force me to retreat, to turn the money back on just to make the noise stop. She thought I was like Julian, terrified of disapproval, desperate to be liked. But she didn't understand that a man who builds foundations knows that storms eventually run out of rain. I didn't respond to the comments, nor did I post a defense or engage in a he said, she said battle in the court of public opinion where truth is irrelevant. Instead, I opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it defamation evidence, downloading the video, taking screenshots of the comments where she engaged with users confirming false details about my mental decline and saving the timestamps. She was claiming I was incompetent, which wasn't just an insult, it was a measurable, falsifiable legal accusation. She was trying to build a case for conservatorship, trying to prove I was unfit to manage my own money so she could step in and save it, a high-stakes gamble played out for an audience of millions. I closed the laptop, feeling a cold, hard resolve settle in my gut, because she wanted a show, but she had forgotten that in the real world, unlike on TikTok, truth requires evidence, and I had a safe full of it. The sound of tires crunching on gravel announced their arrival long before the doorbell rang, a heavy, deliberate sound that broke the mid-morning stillness of the island. I had been expecting them since I saw the first comment on Monica's video suggesting I needed professional intervention, so when I looked out the window and saw the Kittitas County Sheriff's cruiser followed by a sensible beige sedan, I wasn't alarmed, I was relieved, for it meant the game had finally moved from the lawless court of TikTok to the actual jurisdiction of Washington state law. where feelings matter significantly less than facts. I recognized the deputy immediately as Jim Miller, a man whose father had poured concrete for me back in the 90s, and he looked visibly uncomfortable as he stepped out of his vehicle, adjusting his belt and glancing up at my cabin as if he hoped I wasn't home to witness his embarrassment. The woman who exited the sedan was younger, carrying a heavy clipboard and wearing the weary, guarded expression of a social worker who has seen too much of the worst of humanity, preparing herself to deal with the senile, combative old man described in the emergency referral. I opened the door before they could knock, holding a fresh pot of coffee and 3 mugs, a gesture of hospitality that seemed to freeze them in their tracks on the icy walkway. "Morning, Jim," I said, keeping my voice level and welcoming, watching the tension ripple through his shoulders. "And to you, ma'am, please come on in out of the cold. The wood stove is going and the coffee is fresh." Jim blinked, clearly thrown off by my lucid greeting and the utter lack of dementia-induced chaos he had been primed to expect. "Arthur," he nodded, taking off his hat as he stepped inside, the melting snow dripping from the brim onto my slate entryway. "Good to see you. This is Ms. Klein from Adult Protective Services. We received a report." Ms. Klein stepped in past him, her eyes scanning the room immediately, checking for hoarders' clutter, signs of filth, the smell of neglect or decay, but instead finding a spotless cabin, the smell of roasted beans, and shelves lined with architectural reference books organized by year and subject. "Mr. Vance," she began, her tone professional but guarded as she declined the coffee with a slight shake of her head. "We received an emergency referral regarding your welfare, alleging that you are experiencing rapid cognitive decline, that you've become aggressive towards family members, and that you are engaging in erratic financial behavior that endangers yourself and others. Specifically, there was a mention of cutting off heat during a winter storm to a residence housing a minor child." I set the coffee mugs down on the hand-hewn table and gestured for them to sit, taking the seat opposite them with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who has nothing to hide. "The minor child," I said calmly, meeting her eyes, "is a 3-year-old French bulldog named Chanel, and the residence is a property I own, which is currently occupied by 2 able-bodied adults in their 30s who have refused to pay their own utility bills for 4 years. I saw the corner of Jim's mouth twitch, fighting a smile, because everyone on the island knew the type of person Monica was, even if she rarely deigned to cross the bridge to mix with the locals. As for the financial erraticism, I continued, standing up to retrieve the leather ledger from my desk, the heavy book thudding softly onto the table between us. I suppose suddenly stopping a 4-year hemorrhage of cash could be seen as erratic to the parasites feeding off it. I opened the book to the summary page and placed the printed spreadsheet I had prepared the night before next to it. "This is a record of every dollar I have given my son and his wife since 2019, mortgage payments, car leases, credit card bills for designer clothes, spa treatments, and yes, even pet psychics. The total is just over $400,000. I watched Miss Klein's eyes widen as she scanned the columns, her professional veneer cracking slightly as she processed the sheer volume of waste. She flipped the page, tracing the line of zeros that appeared after December 24th. "I didn't lose my mind, Miss Klein. I found my spine. I decided to retire from the job of funding their lifestyle, and if that is evidence of dementia, then I suppose financial responsibility is now classified as a disease." Ms. Klein spent the next 20 minutes reviewing the documents, asking precise questions about my estate planning, my medical history, and my daily routine, all of which I answered with the precision of an architect presenting a blueprint to a zoning board. I showed her the eviction notice, the receipts for the certified mail, and finally, the screenshots of Monica's TikTok video where she claimed I didn't recognize her. "She arrived here yesterday," I explained, pointing to the security camera feed on my laptop which I had queued up for this exact moment. "She demanded I turn the internet back on because she couldn't post on mine. Does that look like a woman concerned for my health or a woman concerned for her Wi-Fi connection? The video showed Monica screaming on my porch, coherent and vicious, while I stood calmly in the doorway, a piece of irrefutable proof that the only person losing control on this island was her. Finally, Miss Klein closed her folder and set her pen down, the tension in her shoulders vanishing to be replaced by a look of sympathy that bordered on apology. "Mr. Vance," she said, meeting my eyes with a newfound respect. "It appears we have been used as a tool for harassment, as I see absolutely no evidence of cognitive impairment or self-neglect. Your home is safe, your finances are remarkably detailed, and your reasoning is sound." She glanced at Jim, who looked relieved that he wouldn't have to wrestle an old family friend into a squad car. "I'm closing this case as unfounded, and I will be making a note in the file regarding the nature of the reporting party because if she calls again with false claims, she could be facing legal consequences for filing a false report." Jim nodded, putting his hat back on. "I'm sorry we had to bug you, Arthur. You know we have to check every call, but, well, it's a shame what folks will do for money." I walked them to the door, shaking both their hands firmly, not with triumph, but with the grim satisfaction of a man who has survived a stress test. "Don't apologize for doing your job," I told them. "You just confirmed what I needed to know. She's scared, and she tried to have me locked away because she knows she can't win a fair fight." As they drove away, the sheriff's cruiser kicking up a cloud of cold dust against the gray sky, I stood on the porch and felt a cold fury harden in my chest like curing concrete. Monica hadn't just insulted me, she had tried to strip me of my autonomy, to use the state to label me incompetent so she could keep swiping that credit card. It was a declaration of war far more serious than a Thanksgiving snub, so I went back inside and added the APS visit report to my defamation evidence folder, knowing that if she wanted to play the victim, I was about to show her what it looked like when a victim started fighting back with the full weight of the law. 2 days passed without a word from Julian, a silence that felt heavy with unspoken decisions, so I spent the time working on the dock, replacing the rotted pilings with treated lumber and swinging a sledgehammer until my shoulders ached and the cold sweat froze against my skin. It was honest work, the kind where effort yields a tangible result, unlike the emotional quicksand I had been wading through for the past 4 years, but inside the cabin, the digital war was still raging. Monica had pivoted from her victim narrative to a defiant survivor arc, posting videos about rising from the ashes and building an empire from scratch, despite the fact that she was still squatting in my house and burning the firewood I had stacked for them in October. I kept a detached eye on her social media, not out of obsession, but out of necessity, for in modern warfare, intelligence is gathered on Instagram Live, and on Tuesday afternoon, while I was oiling my tools in the workshop, my phone buzzed with a notification I had set up for her account. Monica V_style is live, truth-telling in Tesla talk. I wiped the grease from my hands and opened the laptop I kept on a workbench, the screen filling with the image of my driveway in Queen and where the rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and black. There stood Monica, positioned perfectly in front of the silver Tesla Model X, wearing oversized sunglasses and a coat that cost more than my first car, leaning against the vehicle like it was a throne. "They think they can break us," she was saying to the camera, her voice practiced and confident as she gestured with a manicured hand. "They think cutting off the heat will make us leave, but Julian and I are stronger than that because we have resources, we have resilience, and we still have our mobility. This car represents our freedom, and no toxic family member can take that away from us." I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of cold coffee, knowing that she didn't realize the resource she was leaning on was leased in my name, and that 48 hours ago, I had called the dealership to exercise the early termination clause, scheduling the voluntary surrender for this exact afternoon. The timing, I admit, was coincidental, but the result was cinematic in its perfection. As Monica continued her monologue about independence, a flatbed tow truck backed into the frame behind her, the heavy diesel engine drowning out her speech about manifesting abundance. She turned, annoyed, clearly thinking it was a delivery driver ruining her shot, and shouted, "Excuse me. We're filming here. You need to move." The driver, a burly man in a high-visibility vest who looked like he had zero patience for influencers, didn't stop. He put the truck in park, the air brakes hissing loudly, and stepped out with a clipboard. I watched on the screen as Monica's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion, walking up to him with the phone still streaming, inadvertently broadcasting her own downfall to thousands of viewers. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "This is private property." "Pickup order for a 2023 Model X," the driver said, his voice faint but audible through her phone's microphone as he checked the VIN against his paperwork. "Leaseholder is Arthur Vance. Surrender paperwork was signed on Monday." Monica froze, the phone dipping slightly and the camera angle tilting crazily as her composure shattered. "Surrender? No, you have the wrong house. This is my car. My father-in-law he's confused. He has dementia. You can't take this." The driver didn't blink, holding up the clipboard with the indifference of a man who has heard every excuse in the book. "VIN matches, man. Mr. Vance authorized the pickup. If you don't hand over the key fob, I have to winch it up locked, which might damage the drivetrain, so it's your choice." The chat on the side of the screen, which had been full of heart emojis moments ago, suddenly exploded with laughing faces and questions asking if she was getting repossessed on live stream, realizing that Empire was crumbling in real time. That was when Julian walked out of the house, appearing in the background wearing the same gray hoodie he had worn in Winslow, looking like a ghost haunting his own life. He must have heard the commotion, and when Monica spun around and saw him, the fear in her eyes instantly curdled into rage. She forgot the camera, forgot the thousands of people watching, and screamed at him. "Julian, do something. He's taking the car. Your father is stealing the car." Julian stopped halfway down the driveway, looking at the truck, then at Monica, and finally at the car, realizing instantly that I held the lease and paid the insurance. "It's in his name, Monica," Julian said, his voice flat, carrying across the wet pavement. "If he canceled the lease, it's gone." "You're useless," she shrieked, the venom in her voice so raw it made me flinch even through the screen. "You are absolutely useless. You let him do this to me. You let him humiliate me like this. Fix it, Julian. Get in front of the truck. Call the police." Julian didn't move. He stood there in the rain, hands in his pockets, watching his wife unzip her human suit to reveal the monster underneath. The tow truck driver, ignoring the domestic dispute, had already hooked the chains to the undercarriage, and as the winch whined with a high-pitched mechanical scream, the silver symbol of their fraudulent success began to rise into the air. Monica turned back to the phone, realizing too late that she was still live, and scrambled to end the stream, her face a blur of panic before the screen went black. I closed the laptop and sat in the silence of my workshop, feeling not triumph, but a grim sense of progress. There is no victory in watching your son be emasculated by the woman he promised to love, but for 4 years, Monica had used that car, that house, and my money to paint a portrait of a life she hadn't earned. Today, the paint had been stripped away, and Julian had seen it. He had seen her choose the car over him, seen her value her public image over his dignity. I hoped, as I turned off the lights and walked back to the cabin, that the image of that car disappearing down the street would stay burned into his retinas, for I had removed the vehicle that allowed them to run away from reality, and now they had no choice but to stand still and face it. 3 hours after the tow truck had dragged the silver Tesla away, leaving deep gouges in the asphalt of my son's illusions, the headlights of a taxi cut through the darkness of my driveway, sweeping across the wet pines like searchlights in a storm. I was sitting in the study, the only light coming from the fire and the small brass lamp on my desk, waiting, because I knew he would come. The humiliation of the repossession was too public, too visceral to be resolved over a text message or a phone call, and Julian needed a target for the shame that was eating him alive. In his narrative, or rather, the narrative Monica had written for him, I was the architect of his pain, the villain who had pulled the rug out from under their perfect life. I heard the taxi drive away, tires spinning slightly in the mud, followed by the heavy thud of boots on the porch, and then the door swung open without a knock, bringing with it a gust of wet wind and the smell of ozone. Julian stepped into the room, soaking wet, his hood down, his hair plastered to his forehead, vibrating with a rage I hadn't seen in him since he was a teenager crashing his first car. "Are you happy now?" he demanded, his voice cracking, not with tears, but with the strain of shouting down the quiet of the cabin that had always been a sanctuary. He marched into the center of the room, water dripping from his coat onto the rug I had woven myself, his hands balling into fists as he paced back and forth. "Is this what you wanted, Dad? To humiliate us? To have the neighbors watching while a tow truck drags our car away like we're criminals?" Monica is hysterical. She's locked herself in the bathroom screaming that you're trying to destroy her, that you're a vindictive old man who can't stand to see us happy. He stopped, breathing hard, his eyes wild and accusing. "You planned this. You sat here in your little cabin and you planned every step of this. The bank, the power, the car. It's a game to you, isn't it? You're punishing me because I didn't visit enough, punishing me because I chose her over your approval." I watched him quietly, letting him burn through the initial burst of fuel, remaining seated behind my desk with the stillness of a mountain enduring a squall. I didn't stand up, I didn't raise my voice, and I certainly didn't apologize. Instead, I reached into the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a small, red moleskine notebook, placing it gently on the blotter. It wasn't the large financial ledger I had shown the social worker, nor was it a legal document. This was something personal, something I had carried in my pocket for 6 years, a silent witness to a slow-motion tragedy. "Sit down, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through his tirade with the weight of absolute finality. "I didn't do this because you didn't visit, and I didn't do this because you chose her. I did this because for 6 years, I have watched you slowly die, and I refuse to pay for the funeral anymore." Julian stopped pacing, his chest heaving, looking at the book as if it were a weapon. "What are you talking about?" he spat, wiping rain from his face. "I'm not dying. I have a life. I have a wife." I pushed the red notebook toward the edge of the desk. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. He stared at it, shaking his head. "It's a log," I explained, my voice softening just enough to let the truth in. "Not of money. I don't care about the money, Julian, you know that. I would have given you every dime I have if it brought you joy. This is a log of every time I watched your wife dismantle you. Every insult. Every dismissal. Every time she treated you like an employee instead of a husband. I wrote it down because I knew that one day you would forget who you used to be and you would need proof." He hesitated, his anger faltering in the face of my calm, then stepped forward and picked up the book, his hands shaking as he opened it to the first page. I watched his face as he read the entry, his eyes scanning my handwriting which recorded the moment his erasure began. November 18, 2018. Engagement dinner. Monica tells her friends, within earshot of Julian, that she's settling for stability, and that Julian is lucky she's ready to retire from the dating game. Julian laughs, but his eyes look dead. "Turn the page," I said softly. He flipped a few pages, his breathing slowing, becoming shallow as the memories he had repressed were forced back into the light. June 14th, 2020. Julian's birthday. Monica forgets to order the cake. When Julian mentions it, she screams at him for being selfish while she's building a brand. She tells him he's needy and suffocating. Julian apologizes to her for wanting a cake. I saw a tear slip down his cheek, mixing with the rain, but he didn't wipe it away. He kept reading, flipping faster now, drawn into the history of his own abuse like a man reading his own autopsy report. December 25th, 2021. Christmas morning. Julian gives her a diamond bracelet. She throws it on the table and asks for the receipt because the cut is wrong. She calls him pathologically incapable of taste. Julian spends the rest of the day in the garage. The silence in the cabin stretched thin, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the sound of turning pages, until Julian stopped near the end of the book, his finger trembling over a specific date. August 4th, he whispered, reading the entry aloud, his voice broken. "The day I got laid off. She told me not to come home until I had a plan to replace the income. She said." He choked on the words, looking up at me with eyes that were red and raw, stripped of all defense. "She said she didn't sign up for a loser." "You heard that?" "I was in the driveway," I said, standing up and walking over to the window to give him a moment of dignity. "I had come over to fix the deck, and I heard her screaming through the open window. I saw you sitting in your car for 3 hours afterwards, afraid to go inside your own house." I turned back to face him, the anger in the room replaced by a profound, heavy sorrow. "I didn't evict you to hurt you, son. I evicted you because that house is the stage where she performs her cruelty, and I was the one paying for the lights. I cut the funding because I needed you to hit the bottom, to feel the cold, so you would finally wake up and realize you were freezing to death." Julian closed the book slowly, running his hand over the cover, the realization washing over him that his father hadn't been judging him, but witnessing him. "You can stay here tonight," I said quietly, pointing to the couch. "But tomorrow, Julian, you have to decide. You can go back to her and be the victim, or you can stay here and be my son. But you can't be both." The morning after Julian read the red notebook, he woke up looking like a man who had survived a shipwreck, which, in many ways, he had. The storm outside had passed, leaving the sky over Bainbridge Island of bruised purple and the air smelling of wet pine and salt, but the atmosphere inside the cabin was heavy with the debris of shattered illusions. We drank coffee in silence, the only sound the crackle of the wood stove and the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock, and while I wanted to offer him comfort, I knew that the time for parenting him through soft words was over because he needed to see the wreckage for himself. When he finally set his mug down, his hand was steady, but his eyes held a hollow, haunted look that I recognized from the mirror in the months after his mother died. "I need to go back," he said, his voice rough with sleeplessness. "I need to hear her say it. I need to know if there's anything left to save." I nodded, grabbed my keys, and walked to the door, deciding instantly that I wouldn't let him walk into that house alone, not because he needed a bodyguard, but because a witness is the only defense against a gaslight. The drive back to Seattle was a somber procession, taking the ferry across the gray water and watching the city skyline rise from the fog like a fortress of glass and steel. It was the city I had helped build, the city where I had made my fortune, but today it felt cold and uninviting, a monument to commerce rather than community. We pulled up to the house in Queen and around noon, noting immediately that the silver Tesla was gone, leaving a gaping empty space in a driveway that looked like a missing tooth. In its place sat a sleek, black Mercedes sedan, polished to a mirror shine, looking aggressively out of place against the backdrop of the unkempt lawn and the dark windows of the unheated house. Julian stiffened beside me, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the vehicle type if not the specific car. "That's not one of her friends," he muttered, his hand gripping the door handle. "That looks like business." I killed the engine of the truck and stared at the house. "Then let's go see what kind of business your wife is conducting in a house she's being evicted from." We let ourselves in quietly, bypassing the dead electronic lock with the master physical key I had kept on my ring for 4 years, a heavy brass instrument that felt reassuringly solid in my hand. The house was freezing, the air inside stale and still, smelling of cold ash and expensive perfume that had turned sour in the damp air. We could hear voices drifting from the dining room, the sound bouncing off the hard surfaces of the marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows I had installed to maximize the view. I moved to announce our presence, but Julian put a hand on my arm, stopping me in the hallway. He tilted his head, listening with a painful intensity, his face draining of color as he recognized the voices amplified by the emptiness of the house. One was Monica's, shrill, rapid, panicked, and the other was smooth, baritone, the voice of a man who charged $600 an hour to dismantle lives. "You have to understand," Monica was saying, the sound of china clinking against the table echoing down the hall. "He cut everything. The cards, the accounts, the car. I have literally zero liquidity right now, and I can't even pay your retainer until we get a temporary support order." The lawyer cleared his throat, a dry, dismissive sound that spoke of billable hours and emotional detachment. "Mrs. Vance, without access to the marital funds, this becomes difficult. You mentioned the husband works." Monica laughed, and it was that sound, that cruel, dismissive bark I had heard 100 times, that made Julian flinch beside me as if he had been struck. Julian is a mid-level manager at a failing startup. He brings in maybe 80 grand a year, which doesn't even cover my skincare routine. He's useless without the father. The old man was the bank. Julian was just the PIN code I had to punch in to get the cash. I watched my son's face as the words hit him, witnessing not a sudden break, but a slow, agonizing crumble, like watching a building implode in slow motion as the structural supports are detonated one by one. He closed his eyes, his breath hitching in his chest, as the woman he had defended for 4 years, the woman he had alienated his father for, reduced his entire existence to a transaction code. "So the strategy," the lawyer continued, his voice bored, "is to argue that the father established a pattern of support that created a dependency, suing for maintenance from the estate claiming implied contract. But regarding the husband, if he has no assets in his name, he's dead weight. You need to cut him loose to go after the big fish." "I know he's dead weight," Monica snapped, her voice rising in agitation. "Why do you think I'm meeting you? I need to know how to divorce him without losing my claim to the family trust. If I leave him, does the old man stop paying, or can I argue that I'm accustomed to a certain lifestyle regardless of the marriage?" I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles turning white, realizing she wasn't fighting for her marriage or her home, but consulting a foreclosure specialist on how to strip the copper wiring from the walls before the building burned down. She viewed my son not as a partner, but as an obstacle to her settlement, a liability to be liquidated. Julian opened his eyes, and the grief I had seen earlier was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity that matched the temperature of the room. He didn't look at me, nor did he need my reassurance anymore. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it up to show me he had been recording the last 2 minutes of the conversation. Then, he stepped away from the wall and walked into the dining room, his footsteps heavy and deliberate on the hardwood. I followed him, staying a few paces back, a silent sentinel in the hallway. They looked up as he entered, and Monica gasped, dropping her wine glass which shattered on the hardwood, splashing red wine across the white rug, another stain I would have to pay to remove. The lawyer, a slick man in a pinstripe suit, didn't even flinch, he just capped his pen. "Julian," Monica stammered, her face draining of color. We were just. I was trying to figure out how to fix this. For us." Julian looked at her, then at the lawyer, then back at the shattered glass, not yelling or crying, but looking at her with the polite, distant curiosity one might have for a stranger on a bus. "You don't need to fix anything, Monica," he said, his voice incredibly steady. "I think you explained the situation perfectly. I'm just the PIN code. But you forgot one thing." He stepped closer to the table, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. "The PIN code has been changed." The lawyer, a man whose entire career was built on assessing risk and calculating payouts, looked at the phone in Julian's hand, then at the recording indicator, and finally at Monica's pale, frantic face, deciding in that split second that this case had just transitioned from a profitable divorce to a professional liability. He didn't need a judge to tell him that his client had just admitted to financial predation on tape. He capped his pen with a decisive click, gathered his papers into his briefcase, and stood up, offering a curt nod that was more of a dismissal than a farewell. "Mrs. Vance," he said, smoothing his tie with the indifference of a man who has already mentally moved on to his next appointment, "if your husband is recording this conversation and has been advised by counsel regarding the trust structure, my previous strategy is invalid, so I suggest you find representation that specializes in damage control." He walked out past me without a word, the heavy front door closing with a finality that echoed through the foyer, leaving Monica standing alone in the wreckage of her own scheming, the silence in the room deafening now that her accomplice had fled the scene. She looked at Julian, her eyes searching for the familiar softness, the hesitation she had exploited for years, but she found only a stranger wearing her husband's face, a man who had finally looked at the ledger of his marriage and realized he was in the red. Julian didn't wait for her to speak. He turned on his heel and walked toward the stairs, his footsteps heavy and deliberate on the hardwood, and I followed him, not to help, but to witness, stopping at the doorway of the master bedroom while he pulled a dusty duffel bag from the back of the closet. It was an old bag, canvas and leather, one he had used for camping trips before Monica had insisted on matching Louis Vuitton luggage, and seeing it felt like watching an old friend return from a long war. He began to pack, but it wasn't the frantic, haphazard packing of someone running away. It was the methodical sorting of a man taking inventory of his soul. He ignored the Italian suits she had picked out for him, the silk ties he hated, the designer loafers that pinched his feet, instead reaching for his jeans, his college hoodies, and the worn leather boots she had tried to throw away 3 times. He was stripping away the costume she had forced him to wear, retrieving the man underneath who had been suffocating for 4 years under layers of cashmere and expectation. Monica appeared in the doorway, blocking my view, her initial shock having curdled back into that familiar, venomous mockery she used as a shield. She leaned against the frame, crossing her arms, trying to reclaim the power she felt slipping through her fingers like sand. "Oh, this is rich," she laughed, though the sound was brittle and cracked, lacking the sharp edge of genuine confidence. "You're packing a bag." "Really, Julian? Where are you going to go?" "To Daddy's little cabin." "You hate the woods, you have allergies, and you can't function without Wi-Fi." She stepped into the room, kicking at the duffel bag with her pointed toe, trying to provoke a reaction, trying to start the fight that would keep him engaged. "You're acting like a child. Put the bag away, apologize for embarrassing me in front of my lawyer, and maybe we can talk about how to fix this mess your father started, because you know you're not going to leave." You can't function without me. Who's going to tell you what to wear? Who's going to manage your schedule? You're useless, Julian. You're a follower. Julian didn't look up, folding a flannel shirt, one I had given him for Christmas 3 years ago that he had never been allowed to wear, and placing it neatly in the bag. I'm not a follower, Monica, he said quietly, zipping the bag shut and lifting it off the bed. I was a believer. I believed you when you said you loved me. I believed you when you said you wanted a family. I believed you when you said my father was the problem. He stood up, hoisting the bag onto his shoulder, looking lighter than he had in a decade despite the weight of the canvas. But you were right about one thing. I can't function here. Because functioning here means pretending that I don't see what you are. He walked toward the door, forcing her to step aside or be walked through, and she scrambled back, her face twisting in ugly confusion as her control evaporated. You're making a mistake, she shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings I had paid for. If you walk out that door, Julian, don't think you can come crawling back when you realize you're nothing without me. I will destroy you. I will take everything. Julian stopped at the top of the stairs, turning slowly to look at her across the expanse of the master suite, a room designed for intimacy that had become a battlefield. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wedding band, a simple platinum band chosen by her to match her own pave-set diamond ring. He looked at it for a moment, not with longing, but with the curiosity of an archaeologist examining a relic from a dead civilization. He walked over to the marble console table in the hallway, a piece of furniture that cost more than my first truck, and set the ring down on the cold stone. The metal made a sharp clink sound, a tiny punctuation mark at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. You can keep the ring, he said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. Add it to your assets. It's the only thing I have left that you haven't already sold. We walked down the stairs together, the sound of Monica's screaming following us like a ghost that refuses to be exorcised, shouting about lawyers, about alimony, about how she was the victim, but her words had lost their weight, becoming just noise, wind against a stone wall. We walked out the front door into the gray afternoon light, and Julian didn't look back at the house, didn't look at the empty spot where the Tesla used to be, didn't look at the manicured lawn. He walked straight to my truck, threw his bag in the bed, and climbed into the passenger seat. I got in beside him and started the engine, glancing in the rearview mirror one last time to see Monica standing in the window, watching us go, a small, diminishing figure trapped in a cold, dark house that was slowly closing in on her. The eviction clock was ticking, but for Julian, the liberation had already arrived. The 30-day notice expired on a Tuesday morning that broke with a rare, crisp sunshine, illuminating every flaw in the Seattle skyline with an unforgiving clarity that felt entirely appropriate for the task at hand. Julian and I drove to the Queen and house in silence, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the past month. It was the focused quiet of a demolition crew approaching a condemned site, preparing for the final drop of the wrecking ball. We met Sheriff Miller at the bottom of the driveway at 10 o'clock sharp, his patrol car blocking the entrance where the Tesla used to sit, accompanied by 2 deputies who stood with their arms crossed, a necessary precaution given Monica's escalating online rhetoric about standing her ground against the patriarchy and her abusers. The house itself looked like a fortress under siege, the blinds drawn tight against the world, and a hand-painted sign reading "This home is occupied by victims of elder abuse" taped to the front door, a final, desperate attempt to control the narrative that felt pathetic rather than defiant, a cardboard shield against a legal battering ram. Sheriff Miller walked up the path with the heavy, deliberate gait of a man who had executed 100 evictions and had no patience for theatrics, knocking 3 times on the solid wood doors so hard the sound echoed against the cedar siding like the tolling of a bell. "Sheriff's Department," he called out, his voice calm but authoritative, carrying easily in the stillness of the morning air. Execution of eviction order. Open the door, Mrs. Vance. There was no answer from within, but I could hear movement, the scurrying of someone who knows the walls are closing in, and a moment later, the door didn't open. Instead, the window beside it slid up and a phone was thrust out, recording us. Monica's voice, shrill and distorted by panic, screamed from inside the darkened foyer. "You're trespassing. This is a civil matter. I have rights. I have over 1 million followers watching you right now, and they will destroy your career if you touch this door." Miller didn't flinch, didn't look at the phone, and simply held up the signed court order to the camera lens, his face impassive. "Ma'am, this is a court-ordered eviction. You were served 30 days ago. You have 5 minutes to open this door voluntarily, or we will breach it, and if we breach it, you will be arrested for obstruction." The phone withdrew, the window slammed shut, and the clock began to tick down the final minutes of her tenancy. When the 5 minutes were up, the lock clicked, and the door swung open, but it wasn't Monica who revealed herself initially. It was a small group of her influencer friends, young women with ring lights and terrified expressions who had clearly been invited under the pretense of a solidarity sit-in, but were now realizing they were accessories to a crime. They filed out past the deputies, heads down, phones hidden, abandoning their leader the moment the reality of law enforcement pierced their digital bubble, scurrying toward their cars like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Inside, Monica stood in the foyer dressed in a designer tracksuit, holding a half-packed suitcase and her dog, looking at Julian with eyes that burned with a mixture of betrayal and disbelief because she genuinely hadn't believed this moment would come. She had believed, right up until the sheriff knocked, that I would cave, that Julian would break, that the money would start flowing again because family demanded it. "You did this," she hissed at Julian, ignoring the deputies who were moving to flank her, her voice trembling with rage. "You let him do this to me. You let him throw your wife on the street while you stand there and watch." Julian stepped past the sheriff, looking at her with a profound, weary sadness that had no anger left in it, realizing finally that she was incapable of seeing anyone but herself. "I didn't do this, Monica. You did. You built a life you couldn't afford on a foundation you didn't respect, and this is just gravity taking over." She lunged at him then, not to hit him, but to grab his arm, to claw back some hold on him, to force him to engage in the drama one last time, but the deputies intervened instantly, stepping between them and guiding her firmly toward the door. As they escorted her down the walkway, she wasn't screaming at me or the police, she was screaming at her friends, the ones who were standing by their cars, phones raised, filming her humiliation not to help her, but to create content, documenting her downfall with the same voracious appetite they had once documented her luxury. We walked through the house after the door clicked shut behind the sheriff, the silence heavy and absolute, stepping over the debris of her departure. The damage was extensive but superficial, spiteful little acts of vandalism that revealed the pettiness of her soul, wine poured on the white carpets, curtains slashed with scissors, messages scrawled in lipstick on the bathroom mirrors reading "He never loved you and this house is cursed." Julian stopped in the kitchen, running his hand along the marble countertop where he had left his wedding ring weeks ago. The ring was gone, likely pawned or thrown into the sound, but he didn't seem to care. He looked around the empty, ruined space, the stage where he had played the role of the dutiful husband for 4 years, and took a deep breath, the air smelling of stale perfume and cleaning chemicals. "It looks smaller," he said quietly, turning to me. "Without all the noise, it just looks like a house." I nodded, kicking a piece of broken glass toward the wall. "That's all it ever was, son. Wood, glass, and concrete. We can fix the walls. We can replace the carpet. but the rod is gone. We stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the only appliance she hadn't managed to break, and felt the weight of the last 4 years finally lift off our shoulders, leaving us lighter, cleaner, and ready to rebuild. The silence that settled over the Queen and house after the sheriff drove away was not the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb, but the crisp, clean silence of a blank page waiting for a new draft. We spent the next hour walking through the rooms, our footsteps echoing against the bare walls as we took inventory not of what had been lost, but of what could now be released. Julian stopped in the living room, staring at the panoramic window that framed the city, a view he had ostensibly paid for with his dignity for 4 years, where the gray light of the Pacific Northwest filtered in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, unauthorized and uncurated by any influencer's lens. He turned to me, his hands in the pockets of his jeans, looking younger than he had in a decade despite the exhaustion etched into his features, and said, "I can't live here, Dad, even if we fix the walls and replace the carpets. This place, it was never a home, it was a set, and I don't want to be an actor anymore." I nodded, feeling a deep, structural relief settle in my chest, reinforcing the beams of my own resolve because I had been terrified he would try to salvage the wreckage. "I was hoping you'd say that," I replied, leaning against the doorframe and looking at the structure I had designed with such hope years ago. "This house was built for a different life, one that didn't fit you because it was all glass and no timber. We'll list it as is. The market is hot, and the proceeds will go into a trust for your future, a future you actually build with your own hands, not one you inherit or perform." We locked the front door one last time, leaving the key under the mat for the cleaning crew, and as we walked down the driveway, leaving the sprawling estate behind us, I didn't feel a sense of loss for the architecture or the investment. I felt only the satisfaction of a builder who has successfully cleared a condemned site, making way for something smaller, sturdier, and infinitely more real. We drove back to the ferry terminal, the truck cab filled with the easy, comfortable silence of two men who no longer have anything to hide from each other, watching the city recede into the mist. The crossing to Bainbridge was rough, the ferry pitching in the chop, but Julian stood out on the deck with me this time, facing the wind and the salt spray instead of hiding in the car with his phone. When we docked, we didn't go back to the cabin immediately. Instead, I turned down the gravel road that led to the old fishing pier, a weathered stretch of creosote soaked wood jutting out into the sound where I had taken him as a boy. We grabbed the gear from the back of the truck, 2 rods, a tackle box, and a thermos of coffee, and walked out to the end of the dock where the only sound was the slap of water against the pilings and the cry of the gulls, a world away from the digital noise that had consumed his life. The act of baiting a hook is a meditation, a series of small, precise movements that require focus and patience, 2 things Monica had tried to scrub from Julian's existence in favor of instant gratification. I watched him tie a knot, his fingers remembering the rhythm I had taught him 20 years ago, noting that he wasn't the tech middle manager here, and he certainly wasn't the useless husband. He was just a man with a line in the water, waiting for a bite. "I don't know who I am yet," he admitted, staring out at the gray horizon where the water met the sky. "I spent so long trying to be the person she wanted that I forgot what I actually like. I'm 36 years old, Dad, and I feel like I'm starting from zero." He cast his line, the sinker hitting the water with a satisfying plip that rippled outward in perfect concentric circles. "You're not starting from zero," I corrected him, pouring 2 cups of coffee from the thermos and handing him one. "You're starting from bedrock. Before, you were building on sand, trying to sustain a lifestyle that wasn't yours to impress a woman who didn't see you, and that's why it collapsed. Now, you've hit the hard ground, and while it feels rough and cold right now, you can build a skyscraper on bedrock if you have the patience." Julian took the coffee, a small, genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth, which wasn't the performed smile of a selfie, but a real expression of gratitude. "Thanks, Dad," he said softly, taking a sip and looking at me over the rim of the cup. "For the coffee. And for the demolition." We stood there for hours as the tide changed, catching a few small perch that we threw back, talking about everything and nothing, about the cabin repairs, about the possibility of him going back to school or starting his own small firm, but we didn't talk about Monica. She was a storm that had passed, a low-pressure system that had moved east to wreak havoc on someone else's weather map, and out here, on the edge of the continent, the air was clear. As the sun began to set, painting the Olympic mountains in shades of violent violet and deep gold, I reeled in my line and looked at my son, really looked at him, seeing the tension that had defined his posture for years finally dissolving. Monica had called me the architect of their ruin in one of her final texts, meaning it as an insult, a way to paint me as a destroyer, but as I packed up the tackle box and walked side by side with my son back to the truck, I claimed the title with pride. An architect doesn't just design pretty facades. An architect understands that sometimes a structure is too compromised to be saved, and you have to bring the whole thing down, clear the rubble, and respect the laws of gravity before you can lay the first stone of something that will actually last. I had ruined their false life, yes, but in doing so, I had saved my son's real one, and that was the greatest design of my career.